Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's P&G Alumni Network webinar series. This is your host, Ileana Rojas, and I'll be emceeing for today. And I'm very excited for our guest today, Dave Archer, who will be talking about innovating for the consumer of the future. But before I pass on the baton to Dave, let me take you through a couple of announcements on how the web series works. This is a monthly series where our goal is to connect members and provide enriching content where we hope you learn something new and leave you inspired. And we do this by leveraging the expertise that we have within the network. Our webinars are also recorded so that you can go back and review anything you want to listen to again or share with your friends via our P&G Alumni Network YouTube channel. All of this is part of a bigger mission of the P&G Alumni Network, which is a nonprofit founded by former P&G employees to share ideas, talents, and resources with each other, our communities, and philanthropy efforts. With more than 35,000 registered members in 45 chapters worldwide, the P&G Alumni Network is officially recognized and supported by P&G. We connect via global conferences, local chapters, industry events, and online content. Our nonprofit foundation supports economic empowerment initiatives in communities around the world. If you're not aware already, our 2019 Global Conference is in Madrid, Spain, set for October 24th through the 26th. Our last conference was held in Cincinnati in October 2017 and was a huge success, attended by alums from all over the world, including inspiring and thought-provoking speakers and breakout sessions and workshops. And if you're subscribed to our P&G Alumni or have gone through the websites, you must have started to see people that are already being promoted as being a part of this global conference. So definitely a lot of exciting things coming on. Now, we hope that we see you there. You can already start registering, and it will be held at the Intercontinental in Madrid. You can find more information on the network's website and pngalums.com, which, by the way, also just relaunched several months ago. So if you haven't already subscribed, please go and do so. Now, a couple of notes on the webinar logistics. This is your webinar screen. This is where you'll see content, polls, slides, etc. One thing you won't see is webcams. To the right, you'll also see the control panel. You'll notice that your line is muted to avoid hearing dogs barking in the back or any other distracting noises. But don't worry, if you have any questions, you'll be able to ask them through the control panel at any time through the webinar, and we'll have time towards the end of the webinar to go through them. Note that the questions you ask will only be visible to me, and I do apologize beforehand as I may not be able to get to all the questions, but I'll do my best to go through most of them. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you to Dave Archer, who will be speaking to us today about innovating for the consumer of the future. Hello, Dave. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Let me pass on the screen to you.
Okay, we should be live there.
Yes, we are.
Wonderful. All right, let us begin. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted, if a little intimidated, to be speaking to you this morning. This is the first time that I've actually presented a webinar and not been able to see how people are reacting. So I will indulge myself in the fantasy that everybody's paying rapt attention, laughing along with all the jokes, and you're not actually sort of doing your email on your phone or petting the dog or having breakfast or something like that. I'm going to talk to you for about 40 minutes this morning about innovating for the consumer of the future. A little bit of background on myself. This time next year, I'll actually be on your side of the fence because I'll be retired after about 31 and a bit years with P&G. I spent my first 10 years working in the UK. The last 20 years I've spent in the US. I've worked in pretty much every business that P&G, I was going to say has or had, not as many as there used to be when I was around it in the early days. The thing which I think gives me a few credentials to do this little talk this morning is I've always kind of gravitated towards the more upstream side of things and the more insight and innovation related aspects of my job. I'm in consumer and market knowledge. Those of you that are old enough would have known that as the market research department a long time ago. And I've always sort of had this penchant for working in upstream innovation. And then after some long assignments in Fabric Care upstream and then in Fem Care, for the last 6 years, I've actually had the privilege and joy of working entirely on upstream innovation in a group called P&G Ventures, who's basically responsible for understanding where really the company should play next in terms of building billion-dollar categories and billion-dollar brands. It's a very externally focused role. We talk with VCs, startups, and all that good stuff. So what I'm going to talk to you about today should be relevant and interesting, whether you have been or will be working in a big company, or whether you work as part of a VC, whether you're on a non-profit board, whether you're a startup, a founder of a business. The simple sort of principles and stuff that I'm going to talk through this morning should be relevant, whatever area of innovation you work on. So this is what I'm going to attempt to do today. I'm a big believer that people cannot remember more than 3 things at once. I know I can't, so you'll see this rule of 3s appearing a lot. So I have 3 basic objectives today. The first one is to talk about what I'm calling innovation imperatives. These are things that, in my experience, both good and bad, are likely to increase the chances of developing successful innovation. I'm going to give you some insight as part of kind of unpacking that whole thing on where I believe the world is going and what that means for innovators. Those 2 objectives are where we're going to spend, I think, the majority of our time this morning. I also try and bring it all to life by sharing some examples and stories, including some of the stuff that I've been working on very recently within the P&G New Ventures space. So here's the first set of 3. There are 3 innovation imperatives. The first one is the criticality of developing a worldview, something that we might call a kind of a thesis on how it all hangs together, where the world's going. If you're going to innovate and you're going to create sustainable innovation that lasts not just for a couple of seasons or a couple of years, you really need to have an understanding of how the world is going to change. And that's kind of an interesting piece of analysis that I'll share with you. The second thing I'm going to talk about is related to doing what I'm calling the whole job for the consumer. Several of you may have heard about the whole idea of consumer jobs to be done. We've taken it to a whole new level of practice, I think, over the last couple of years in PGV. And I'm going to talk about how approaching innovation problems through the mindset of doing the whole job for the consumer can really open our minds to possibilities. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about the imperative, which I'm calling make it personal. This is not about personalization. I'll tell you what it is about when we get a little bit closer there, so you have to stick around to the end to find out. So this is where we're going to spend the majority of our time. It's a little bit of a sad indictment of how long I've been in the US, that the little kind of phrase that I've captured on the bottom of this slide doesn't actually come from football, as it should do, as I'm from the UK. It actually comes from ice hockey. So this idea of, you need a point of view on where the puck is going. If you're always looking at where the puck is or where the puck has been, you're always going to be behind the game. So this idea of developing some prescience, a forward-looking view of what's going to happen, becomes an incredibly important part of successful innovation. I mentioned earlier on that P&G Ventures is really the arm of P&G that's charged with finding where the next billion-dollar brands and categories are going to come from. This is not about developing the next upgrade on Tide or on Always or on Pampers. This is literally about new business creation. And we don't create a business and invest all that money in it only to see it wrap up in 3 or 4 years. So we really are trying to have an idea about where are things going not just in the next 5 to 10 years, but the 15 to 25 year time frame as well, as far as it's possible to do that. So let's unpack this whole idea of developing a worldview, a thesis, a view of where we should actually be looking for innovation. And I'm going to start with a very simple but powerful statement. I wish I'd been smart enough to think of this, but this actually comes from a guy called Bob Mester, who runs a company called the Rewired Group that focuses on consumer jobs to be done, and he's really done some incredible work there, so credit to Bob. This is the idea that the struggling moment is the seed for innovation. And what does that actually mean? We talk a lot about innovation being the lifeblood of companies, and creating innovation almost becomes an end in itself. But in fact, innovation should never be an end in itself. Innovation is a how. Okay? Innovation, when it's good, is always in service of something. In fact, I would say it's always in service of somebody who's trying to achieve something. Because if there is deep consumer satisfaction with the products and services that they're using to get something done, if there is no struggling moment, there's no real need for disruptive innovation. Because, being the kind of relatively lazy system one lizard brain species that human beings are, we don't really like adopting new habits unless we have to. So if there isn't really a struggling moment there isn't really an awful lot of need for innovation. So this very first tenet, it really holds that we need to truly understand what consumers are struggling with as they're trying to live their day-to-day lives in order to look for where we might help them. So this is a second little icon here, which is, again, simple but incredibly powerful. This is the idea of a consumer job to be done. And if you look at this very simple diagram, there's a guy standing what looks like, at least, on the bank of a river, and he wants to go to the other side. Okay, so the job he's trying to do, his desired progress, is to get from one side of the bank to the other. This seems that it should be incredibly simple, but as innovators, it should be raising a whole multitude of questions for us. So let's assume just for a second that we are in the business of helping people get from one side of the river to the other. What kind of things do we really know to provide the best possible service and aid to this guy in his desired progress? There's one little thing I would highlight to you here, that all progress, all innovation is contextual. Okay, everything takes place with a particular set of context around it. So a job to be done is the progress that somebody's trying to make in particular circumstances. So one of the things that we need to understand is what those circumstances are. So we might start off thinking, okay, well, who is this guy? Why does he want to go to the other side of the river in the first place? Is he a farmer and literally the grass is greener on the other side of the bank? Is he a trendy millennial and all his mates have gone to the latest craft beer pub over on the other side and he wants to catch up with them? Does he have some social pressure to be on the other side of the river because that's a more desirable postcode? So understanding what it is the guy's trying to achieve in this circumstance is kind of important. And also, I would draw your attention to the little squiggly line, which, we're assuming is water, is a river. Okay, a couple of questions then. How deep is the river? Can the guy swim? Is the river infested with sharks? All of these things would impact our innovation design criteria of how we would create something that helps him to get from one side to the other. We need to understand who he is, his motivations, the circumstances he's in, what his capabilities are, if we're actually going to develop innovation that really works for him. So with that in mind, kind of job number one is to really understand who it is that we're innovating for and what they're struggling with. And this is where we did a lot of work about 4 or 5 years ago in PGV to really understand where we think the future of consumption is going. And I'm going to introduce another set of 3 things here, which is what we're calling the macro shifts. And there are 3 who's and there are 3 how's. The 3 who's, what is this about? These are the 3 demographic groups that are going to do, in our opinion, the most to shape the future of consumption and the future world. So the interesting thing about this is not trends. This is about demographic realities. These people have been born already. In fact, the urban millennials are undergoing a bit of a metamorphosis right now where they're turning from, the trendy dudes with ironic beards looking to be an individual snowflake in the way that they dress, and they're turning into the parents that are buying P&G's products right now. So understanding not just their buying power and their potential, but to understand how they're shaping the culture of consumption becomes incredibly important. I'll double click on these in a little bit, but just to give you an overview, the three who's that were really innovating for: urban millennials, aging boomers, the Chinese middle class. I'll explain that a little bit in a second. So there are the three who's that are really driving the future of consumption. And if you're going to develop new sustainable businesses and brands, you need to be hitting a home run with one or more of these. The second set of three shifts is the drivers of how they will consume. So what does acceptable innovation look like? What is the context in which that they are consuming and buying products and trying to live a better life? And again, I'll double click on these, but the first one is this idea of the biological mindset, or the biological mindset shift that we sometimes call it, which is a little bit of a kind of a backlash to the big chemistry of the 21st century and everything that that's led to. The notion of hyperconnectivity, and then the idea of rapid resource depletion, not just physical resources, but also social and emotional resources like time, energy, stress, etc., etc. So let's start to look at the three who's who are going to be driving global consumption. And I'm going to start with the urban millennials. So for the next foreseeable future, the future is urban and it's millennial. And these two things are related together. You know, we're undergoing right now unprecedented urbanization. And to a very large extent, it's being driven by millennials, not just in terms of their literal migration towards cities to get the best opportunities that are available, but also in terms of millennials are shaping the city culture, which then shapes the culture around it and drives, you know, some of the trends in consumption patterns that we see in society. So a few little factoids. I'm sure this stuff is not terribly new for you, but it helps to bring it to life. By 2025, millennials are going to represent 63% of the global population. They're already controlling about a third of global income. The context that they're living in, this is a fascinating little statistic that we got from some analysis in China. The average living space per urban millennial in China is 390 square feet. So if we're inventing and innovating, you know, big stationary devices to press their clothes or whatever it happens to be, that's probably not going to jive or fly well in that reality of really cramped space. And I'll talk a little bit more in a second about lack of space. There are already 22 cities in the world that have got more than 10 million people living in them. And the other interesting thing is that these millennials that are driving urbanization are really very, very well educated, which also has an impact on their ability to drive culture and drive change. Now, you know, we could spend an awful lot of time talking about any one of these who's, and I have to make some pretty crass generalizations just to kind of paint a picture for you. But, you know, essentially what we've discovered from our research is that, you know, urban millennials have got quite a good unified value system that you can kind of look at and analyze, and a global perspective that's really shaping urban consumption as this growth of mega cities continues. So some of the highlights that you might have, you know, heard in various things that you've seen or read, this whole idea of, you know, living more but consuming less. The idea that it's not just about the bling, it's about the experience, and experience is shared. It's about the drive for more sustainable solutions. You know, the millennials are a really fascinating group because they sit on this knife edge between wanting and demanding the instant gratification that comes with digital society. You know, the buy it now, the click now, etc., etc. But they don't want that instant gratification to be at the expense of the future. So they want to leave a positive legacy as well as having instant gratification, which again, you know, creates some interesting opportunities and challenges for innovators. And very interestingly, they're also living kind of on stage, on the go, always on. I mean, you know, it's not new news that, you know, we're talking about a generation here that's grown up with the Facebooks and the Instagrams and the Snapchats and you know, the age of, you know, photoshopping photographs, always being on display, wanting to be out there. It's the gig economy where you're only as good as your last sort of performance, be that at work, be it personally. People are moving to the cities for opportunities. And what all of this is doing is it's really changing the nature of the meaning of home. And, out of all of the things I could have double clicked on for urban millennials, I think this is one of the most powerful, especially when we think about this from a P&G point of view. People are leaving their homes to come to the city, and that becomes a big source of identity. So on the left of this slide, you've got the suburban meaning of home. Home's the house that you live in. It's the key source of personal identity. On the right, the urban meaning of home. Home's the city where you dwell, right? I'm a New Yorker. It's a key source of personal identity, of personal pride. And you don't move to Manhattan to spend your 24 hours a day sitting in a 400 square foot apartment. You want to be out there, realizing all the opportunities that the city has to offer. And the relative perceived worth of homemaking, as we might have defined it, of building those skills of how to do laundry well, care for the home, that's just becoming less part of people's identities and identity markers. And one of the things that's really been very interesting for us is this phenomenon where we talk to consumers living as partners, as man and wife, sometimes at shared spaces, and there are multiple breadwinners in the home. There could be the couple, there could be two breadwinners, but there's no designated homemaker anymore. If somebody's working, the female head of household, for example, is working full time, why should she have to come home and just because of her gender do all the tasks of homemaking? And yet when you look at a lot of the information and a lot of the advertising that's out there about homemaking, it's still very much grounded in this old suburban view of what homemaking is. And in a world where population is increasingly concentrated, services become incredibly affordable and for providers as well as the people buying those services. And if you don't really value some of those homemaking tasks, it starts to become very attractive to think about outsourcing them, not just because it's convenient, but it's also a source of family harmony, or at least eliminating some disharmony about who's going to do the washing up or who's going to, iron the laundry or whatever it happens to be. The next demographic group is what we're calling the aging boomers. And again, a few little stats here. By 2025, there will be 1.2 billion people over the age of 65. Amazingly, 196 million of those will be in China. And because of the single child policy, we're seeing a lot of Chinese older consumers living on their own. And that provides some big challenges for them and the services that provide them. So related to that, already in the US, whilst the 65 plus group is only 13% of the total population, they're consuming 36% of healthcare expenses. This is probably not a sustainable model. And so is there opportunity to enable consumers who are older to live safely, to stay at home, which is a big piece of desired progress for them, in a way which is not just safe and advantageous for them, but isn't sucking all of the resources out of the healthcare system as well? What does good caregiving look like in more of a home context? Something near and dear to my heart, I mentioned that I worked in Fem Care for 7 years. By 2025, another 880 million women will have gone through the menopause, and I'll talk about a new business that we're creating around that in a few moments. And then this is a very interesting stat. 1 in 5 adults in the US is already serving as a caregiver for somebody in their family. And I don't know about you, but I don't know many businesses that are set out to really service the jobs to be done and the needs of those caregivers. So thinking about, aging boomers, how would you kind of capture their desired progress as kind of a consumer cohort? They're a group that have got physiological needs and challenges now. They have a sense of kind of body betrayal. The mind's still active, the body's maybe letting them down a little bit, but they desperately want to stay in the game. They want to stay vital, connected, and they want to stay at home. And those are, really big, important things for us to bear in mind. The Chinese middle class, this is kind of a surrogate for us for a broader insight which we're calling the emergence of the Asian century. This is the first real big demonstration of it, but we worked with Euromonitor and we looked at purchasing trends across literally thousands of categories, and had them run projections of where the spending power in the world would be, and some very, very fascinating stats. So by 2025, half the people in the world are going to be living in Asia. But this is the piece from Euromonitor that truly blew my mind. By 2025, for every dollar consumers are spending in the US, $6.50 is going to be spent in Asia. So again, as we think about what it's going to take to develop innovation that's sustainable, that's going to drive, new brands and new categories, we have to be aware of this massive Asian influence. And again, as I mentioned before, it's not just about pure spending power. It's also about the culture of consumption, because, one little example I would give you, the comparison between how medicine is viewed in the West versus how medicine is viewed in the East is dramatically different. So, the Western medicine has grown up very much on, you have a symptom like a headache or a pain, you pop a pill, you hope it goes away. It's very reactive. It's very sort of symptom specific. In the East, the whole area of traditional Chinese medicine, more holistic, sustainable wellness, you tend to be trying to look for the root cause, treat the whole person in a sympathetic way. And we're starting to see that kind of whole mentality bleed through into all of the areas around sustainable wellness that we're seeing in the West, not just the East. So the Asian influence is very, very big and will only get bigger over time. Another amazing stat, between now and 2025, there will be 516 million more urban dwellers in China, which is the equivalent of 62 new New York cities. So it's difficult sometimes when you're sitting in the US to get your head around the scale that we're talking about here, but it's pretty flippin' vast. And then the Chinese middle class, who are educated, relatively well off, are looking for visible consumption. There are 850 million of them, or there will be by 2025, the biggest middle class in the world. So I mentioned this already, they're the proxy for where to play first in this Asian century of Asia-driven population growth and spending power. I'm going to change tack now and talk about the context in which these demographic groups are living and the influence they're having on how consumption is going to happen and what's acceptable and what isn't. And I'm first of all going to talk about this thing that we're calling the biological mindset shift. If the 20th century was the century of big chemistry, the 21st century is the century of biology. Breakthroughs in life sciences, solutions that are perceived to be more sustainable, that are perceived to have less collateral damage, that are working with the planet, with nature, with my body rather than against it. So I'm not going to talk about the naturals trend here, but what I would say to you is the natural trend is just one manifestation of a much bigger sea change in society, which is driven by this whole idea of sustainability with a small s, sustainable lifestyles and wellness. Buying green, buying free from is just the obvious, easy way to get to that desired progress right now, but it's not the end game. There is massive, massive opportunity in helping people live lives that are more sustainably well by taking into account this desire for more personalized, genomic-specific solutions that feel like they're just what I and my family need and nothing I don't. They're targeted to what I particularly need by really understanding what my needs and what my biology are. Hyperconnectivity is an interesting, if obvious one. We're already seeing more than 25 billion connected devices globally, which is over 3.5 a person. And as I was getting ready to come out the door this morning, I realized that I had an iPad and 2 iPhones. So I need to buy a half a device and I'll be up with the global average. But the reason why this is such an important concept, or context, I should say, is that the reality is that every device is connected to every other device. So everything is connected to everything. Everything is connected to everybody, and everybody's connected to everybody. So in this world where everything is connected to everything else, it sets a very, very high bar for innovation and innovators, because consumers know that these devices are collecting information, collecting data, and they want something back for that. They want solutions that are smart, that are prescient, that are anticipatory, that are using that information and that knowledge about them and their habits in order to give more targeted solutions that are not just reactive, but are anticipating what their needs are. And that's not just in terms of apps, that's in terms of the currently dumb products that people buy, like their diapers, their Fem Care products, their laundry detergents. These are all opportunities to create connectivity and enhance the consumption experience as a result. The last of the three pieces of context is what I'm calling rapid resource depletion. And what I want to emphasize here is that resources are not just the physical ones, like water, energy, oil. They're also personal resources. Stress is an unbelievable problem for so many urban millennials, for example, that are living their lives in big, congested urban environments, always on the go, only as good as their last sort of performance, if you like. So time, energy, focus, money, these are all resources that really impact the needs that consumers have in their everyday lives. So here's how all of this kind of comes together. We've talked about the three who's that are going to be driving global consumption and whose needs we need to be very cognizant of if we're going to create successful innovation. We've also just kind of scratched the surface of how they want to consume. Now, for those of you that have been in P&G relatively recently, you'll remember the famous kind of advertising framework, which was the who, what, how. The piece that I haven't talked about yet is the what. I've talked about the who and I've talked about the how. So what is it that people need help with, these three demographic groups? How can we try and understand what it is that we should be, or where it is we should be looking for to understand what we need to innovate against to make their lives better? And, this is probably one of the most difficult and one of the most intimidating pieces of the work that I've done over the last several years. When you have the whole ocean to fish in, where do you even start? Well, we actually came across a body of work called the Anthropological Constants, developed by a guy called Donald Brown. And it's the idea that as long as mankind or humankind has walked across the surface of the earth, there are certain clusters of needs that are universal and have never changed, that are just constants in people's lives. The need to find partners, the need to procreate, to find shelter, to be warm, to have community, etc., etc. There are hundreds of these things, fascinating body of work. What we've been able to do, and remember the famous rule of three, is distill all those literally hundreds of anthropological constants down into three groups, which we believe are universal. The universal need to protect from harms, both myself, the people I love, the things I possess that are of value. The drive to maximize potential, not just of myself, but of the people I love. So think about this from the point of view of millennial parents. How do I ensure in this tough, conflict-ridden world that I'm growing up kids and nurturing kids in a way that makes them resilient and able to maximize their potential? How do I make sure that they get the edge that I believe as a parent they deserve, that they're going to need to win in this big urban competitive environment? And all of this is done with an eye on managing resources effectively. Do I have the money? Do I have the resources? Do I have the time? Do I have the accessibility to make all of these things so? So this is the way we're kind of thinking about this in PGV, that there are these three benefit domains, enabling healthy homes and humans in the city, which is related to protection from harms, enabling people to stay vital, connected, and in the game, which is around maximizing potential, and then enabling people to manage their use of personal and environmental resources. And I'm going to bring this to life by kind of showing what this means for innovation and how it can really help. Because what we've just said here is that there are sort of universal drivers that we can look at that have existed forever. But what we've also said, where I spent the first 20 minutes talking about, is the evolving context of consumption. Where the real skill lies is in understanding how that context that's evolving, the three new who's, the three hows, are crashing into those universal benefit domains, those anthropological constants, and are changing the nature of the work that needs to be done, and are raising new potential jobs and new potential sources of innovation. So I want to take you through a very specific example to bring this to life. And this is an example that's grounded in China. And it's an example where we're going to talk about the opportunities that we've realized for P&G that lives in this space of protection from harms and wanting to do that in a way which is effective and harmless. So let me get on with the story. This is a story of a consumer called Zhao Zhang. Zhao Zhang is a female pig farmer growing up in a place called Whitehorse Village in rural China. The backdrop to this is you can see this astonishing rise in very deliberate urbanization that's happened in China between 1950 and 2015. As I say, this is very deliberately engineered. So this is Whitehorse Village in 2006. This is where Zhao Zhang was farming her pigs. The government decided that they were going to make Whitehorse Village into a new town. So the plan over a few short years was to go from 3,000 people to 200,000 people, a 6,500% increase. This was going to be a new center of manufacturing called Wuxi Newtown. This is what that same valley looked like during the process of construction. This is what it looks like today. And this is Zhao Zhang on the outskirts of the city. Now, if you think about this for a second, as a pig farmer, Zhao Zhang was very concerned with protection from harms. She was very concerned with making sure her livestock didn't get sick, that she had enough resource to feed her family, that anything that she was doing to stop the pigs getting diseases wasn't going to have any impact on the kind of the food chain. She was worried about the weather and all of those other things that you know are typical of a rural environment. That desire to drive protection of the thing, of herself and the people and the things that are valuable to her hasn't changed, but the context has changed dramatically, right? So this is her now not a pig farmer anymore, but using vehicular transport to get to her white collar day job. This is her giving some coaching to her kids. This is a really interesting story because you look at the destruction of Whitehorse Village and it can make you go, oh my God, you know, isn't that terrible? To Zhao Zhang, it's a complete change in the opportunities her life evolves that has both incredible positives, the opportunity to give her kids an education that she never had, to not be reliant on making a living out of the soil anymore. But it also carries with it some real threats. And one of the things that she's very, very concerned about is in this environment where you've got lots of waste, lots of construction, you've got trash sitting in piles, big urban concentrations, there is a huge issue with pests and flies and mosquitoes and cockroaches and other bugs. And the current solutions that Zhao Zhang has to protect her kids from that are things that she really doesn't like very much. So this is how it kind of comes together. This is the idea of Fend, which is now called Zevo, by the way, which is a new business that we're creating in P&G. And it's directly coming from the insights that we've had that I've talked about over the last 25 minutes or so, which is we want to transform the in-home insecticide market because we want to resolve the trade-offs between the toxicity of the current products used to control bugs and the desire to keep my family safe. So right now, Zhao Zhang, living on the 30th floor of an apartment building, if she's trying to keep her kids safe from mosquito bites, not just the worry of disease, but they're awake during the night getting bitten and scratching and itching, and that means they don't necessarily focus when they go to school the next day. But the alternative that she has to having them getting bitten is to use really toxic spray chemicals, which are basically neurotoxins, which don't discriminate between bugs and people, or smoking coils that you plug into the electrical outlet of the wall. These are things that carry massive trade-offs. And if you think about the desire to build healthy, resilient kids, you think about that biological mindset shift, wanting more sustainable solutions that are connected, here is the opportunity to create a surprisingly obvious idea that actually uses the biology of bugs against them in order to create a safe solution. So this thing is a plug-in that plugs into the wall, and it uses the bug's natural desire to find humans to bite in order to trap them, because it mimics the scent of human sweat. It has heat because it's plugged in, and it has a blue light, all of which makes that trap more attractive to the bug than me or you would be to them. And so in a very safe way, it attracts, without using any toxic chemicals, it attracts the bugs into the trap. They get stuck on this non-toxic sticky fly paper, and you can just throw them away. So this is an example of how you can use an understanding of the context in order to develop truly amazing innovation. It's looking very, very promising in terms of testing versus the last two big brands that we launched in P&G, Febreze and Swiffer. So I'm finishing this first and most major part of the little talk now. For those of you that are kind of already jumping ahead and thinking, well, this is great, Dave, but what about Gen Z? That's a great point. The point about this contextual work, understanding and creating a worldview for innovation is it's never done. The context is always changing. I'm off at field work at the end of this week in Atlanta, talking to Gen Zers about their needs and all the rest of it. So watch this space for more to come. The second area that I want to talk about is this innovation imperative, which is called addressing the whole job. I've talked about consumers' jobs to be done a little bit already, but this is kind of really bringing it to life. One of the things that I've learned about innovation over the last several years is that big manufacturers and companies, we categorize our businesses by solutions rather than consumer jobs to be done. And those categories don't always capture or address the whole job the consumer's trying to get done. So I've, coined this phrase, the world is full of partial solutions, and by the way, consumers hate them. And here's a pretty painful example to look at, but it really makes the point. This is a kind of I would say almost like an anti-Gillette advert. This is an advert for Dollar Shave Club, or a still from it. And what's fascinating about this is, by looking at the still shot, you would probably never guess that this was about blades and razors, right? This is about Dollar Shave Club going, you know what? There's more to being a well-groomed man than just how effectively a razor blade gets the stubble from off your face. There is a bigger, broader job to be done here, which is accessibility. The guy's, wanting to go off on a date. It's late in the evening, and he realizes he doesn't have a blade. Then, because of the expense of the blades, they're locked up in cabinets, and he has to go to the shop assistant to get her to unlock them. So there are a whole bunch of opportunities in the consumer job around subscription, availability, expense that were potentially a soft spot for Gillette and current incumbents. That Dollar Shave Club, by understanding the whole job, all of the struggling moments associated with male grooming, they were able to create a breakthrough. So, think about the language. We talk internally about what we used to anyway, the blades and razors business. It's about much more than blades and razors. Blades and razors is a P&G definition. It's not what the consumer job to be done is. So armed with that kind of example, we're determined not to repeat mistakes. So this is an example of a new brand that we've created called PepperWhits, and it's about menopause care. I mentioned earlier that I spent 7 years in Fem Care, and one of the big struggles that I had was that once women stopped having periods, we kind of stopped serving them to a large extent. And there was this universal journey that women go through, going through menopause, this huge transition in life, and there was really nothing there to support them. We worked out that as we were looking into this area, that to cater for all of the symptoms associated with estrogen loss, which is, the big physiological change that happened through menopause, she would have to shop in 6 different categories in 3 different channels, because there isn't a menopause care business. Nobody's created a menopause care category, so it leaves it all on the shoulders of the woman who's going through menopause to try and curate those products for herself. And this is a big issue. There are already 48 million women in the US that are over the age of 45. And look at all of these symptoms that are associated with menopause, and think about all the potential consumer jobs there that just weren't being done in a holistic fashion. So many, many opportunities for her to serve her. Credentialed advice that's available, community, peer coaching. Hey, let me feel that I'm not the first person that's ever gone through this. Share some stories about how other people have gone. Of course, there are the great products, and I'll talk about those in a second. There is the opportunity to create customer support, some subscription, do the whole job around menopause care for the consumer. So you'll see this is the kind of the holistic product set that's going after everything from hot flashes to vaginal dryness and itching and painful sex to skincare, all curated under a brand that makes sense by understanding the whole consumer job. And to everyone's relief, I am onto my final piece now, which is the idea of make it personal. This is one of the biggest lessons I've learned in innovation. And it's the idea that whether you're working in a big company like P&G, whether you're a founder working on a startup, you will need to build the conviction of stakeholders in your idea. You're going to need help. You're going to need resources, whether that's money from a VC, whether it's permission from your boss to go and work an idea that you're passionate about. You will need to build conviction amongst those stakeholders from whom you need help. And the idea of making it personal is what I found to be the most successful way of thinking about that. So making it personal isn't just about personalized innovation. It's giving your idea a face and giving people skin in the game. And the way you give people skin in the game is by developing an empathic response. So one quick story. This is not the individual consumer I'm talking about, because that would be a breach of PII and inappropriate. But as we were doing our work on caregiving, I interviewed a consumer who was a caregiver for her husband of some 50 plus years. She was about, 110, 120 pounds in weight. He unfortunately was bedbound and about 300 pounds in weight. He had become incontinent, so she was having to do all of his personal cleansing and diet ring, multiple times a day, even several times a night. And imagine as a 110 pound woman trying to manipulate a 300 pound guy who's kind of bedbound. Unfortunately, it gets even worse because the guy was also suffering from dementia and got very, very anxious and quite hostile when he was being handled. So when you think about the context of this caregiver, this multiple times a day wrestling match was not what this couple envisaged for each other that the future would be. And giving that story of caregiving, giving it that personal insight, giving it that face, I can guarantee when you leave this webinar today, it'll cross your mind. It'll get you thinking about, my God, what if that happened to me? What if I was the bedbound guy? What if I was the person giving the care? What would that do to the relationship? Would I resent having to do that? This is a way of developing insight and empathy into what the consumer issue is. And taking it further, the way that typically companies like P&G work is that when we want help from a stakeholder, typically a boss or a fund holder, we kind of try and collect hard and fast data, and we try and get their alignment as a result of this data. Look, we've done this testing, we're really smart, this is what the answer is. And it's a very transactional relationship that's about convincing. But what it doesn't do is develop the level of conviction in the person who we need help from that we really need. And we get into this horrible situation where, data becomes this hammer that we try and bludgeon the decision maker down, and I'll collect more and more data until you just have to agree that this is a great idea. And that's really completely the wrong way to do it. The biggest thing that you can do is to tell your human story of how your innovation is really going to change people's lives for the better, and develop what is a very, very rare response in any kind of species around the world, and that is the idea of empathy. If you can build empathy in people, especially P&Gers, and you can inspire advocacy, championship for that consumer need, that's going to drive some action. The kind of people that P&G hires can't just let people suffer in silence. So if you've got something that's really going to help the human condition, building empathy is going to be something that's going to help you get there. I am going to pretty much wrap up at this point. I'm just going to give a little bit of a kind of a party political broadcast advertisement for what PGV is doing. For those of you out there that are listening to this live or in the future, PGV is open for business to create these new billion-dollar brands and categories. And these are some of the areas that we're looking at, inspired by this worldview that I took you through half an hour ago. So alleviating the symptoms of menopause, treating chronic skin conditions, improving sleep, caregiving for the aged, maintaining a non-toxic home, enhancing male wellness, maximizing mental and physical performance. Remember that whole maximizing potential piece, and managing pain without side effects. So what we're hoping to do is really create this new disruption. These are just 4 of the projects that have gone live already that you can read about, and that's what we're all about. So, Ilana, I am done and ready for questions for the last 10 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dave. This was extremely insightful and definitely a lot to think about of what's coming, like you say, about the future in terms of consumers, in terms of trends, and looking at it from a different perspective. So everyone that's listening, I'm probably only going to be able to take 2 questions, but feel free to write any ones that you might have in case we're able to get one more. So the first question is about the statistics that you gave at the beginning about the Chinese middle class, if that was overarching over all of Asia, or was it specific to China?
That's specific to China, apart from the figure, which was the $6.50. That's across all of Asia.
Okay, perfect. And then in the case, based on your background in CMK, somebody's curious what research you found most helpful in the journey, not just for developing the insights, but also for validating the ideas and solutions that they'll be successful.
That's a great question. One of the things that I've realized is that in the brave new world where it's so much easier to create a digital mock-up of an idea, like a landing page or something like that, the ability to get feedback on your ideas in real time is bigger than it's ever been. And the impact that that's having is it's blurring the lines between functions. So whether I'm a market researcher or I'm a marketer, I have the ability to create a prototype, throw it up on a website, get consumer reaction to it. Do they add it to the cart? Do they click buy it now, et cetera, et cetera? And the lines between marketing and market research are getting very, very narrow because, as the product begins to go live and you can track all this data in real time, you want the marketing people to be au fait with that information and be using that in real time, not waiting for some middleman or middlewoman person in CMK to do the analysis and hand it over. So what we've done, in answer to your question, is we become much more fluid multifunctionally in our testing. We do a lot more what we call lean innovation, so lean startup innovation. We try and behave like a startup where we make a few prototypes, or like I say, we make some digital content, and we throw it up there, and we just learn and we iterate. You know, the only thing that's certain about innovation is you'll be wrong in your first several attempts. And so the faster and cheaper that you can get real consumer immersive feedback on your ideas, the better. So we do a lot of that, and we all, you know, it's all hands to the pump, whether you're in product research, marketing, or market research. We all share that burden.
Yeah, definitely that seems to be the trend in general going forward. What was the source of the anthropological study?
The anthropological constants, there's a whole body of work by a guy called Donald Brown. But we actually hired a fantastic anthropologically driven research company called GEMIC, G-E-M-I-C, who were at the time based out of Finland, and now they have offices in the US. And they both have academic backgrounds in ethnography and anthropology. And it just fitted so beautifully with the idea of truly understanding human jobs to be done. Because our whole ethos in PGV is we don't start by looking at P&G's current businesses. In fact, that's what we're charged not to do. We're not going to be developing the next upgrade for the current Fabric Care business. So that gave us the luxury to take a step back and go, what are humans struggling with that P&G has a permission to win in because of our expertise? And that's kind of what triggered that back to basics study of humans. So we did lots of desk research, lots of reading, but lots and lots and lots of primary immersion across the world with these different consumer demographic groups.
Awesome, definitely interesting. Well, we are basically 4 minutes away, and I still have a couple of slides to go through. Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing all of this amazing information. I'm definitely going to go back and look at it again. For everybody that's been asking about the slides, you know, the presentation is going to be available in P&G Alumni's YouTube channel. So you can go back and see it again if you need to. I'm definitely going to go back and look at it again. So Dave, thank you so much for sharing all this great information and for being here with me. So I'm taking back control. Couple of closing announcements. Like I mentioned, all our webinars are recorded, so you'll be able to go back and review them on our YouTube channel. We also invite you to get involved. Sign up for updates in our new pngalums.com page. Support the foundation at pngalums.com foundation, or partner with us as a sponsor. There's also a way to link through that. And then volunteer, join a chapter. There's definitely a lot of chapters around the world. Feel free to join one and continue to be a part of this movement. And you can also reach out to us via email at hello@pngalums.com, where you can share all your ideas, thoughts, recommendations of how we can make this network just be stronger for all of us. Please join us on our next webinar on June 11th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time with Susan Mboya with 10 tips to develop great partners. And I thank you all again for being here today, for joining another exciting webinar. This is your host, Ileana Rojas, and I wish you all a great rest of your day, wherever in the world you may be. Thank you for joining.